On September 9, 2025, a lone Su-424 bomber carrying 2 Storm Shadow cruise missiles embarked on one of the most daring missions of the war. Guided by intelligence intercepts and supported by a vast network of drones and electronic warfare, its objective was clear: strike deep inside Donetsk and obliterate the headquarters of Russia's 41st Army and 20th Division. The attack unfolded through deception, chaos, and precision, culminating in the destruction of 2 command centers once thought untouchable. The result was not only the collapse of a Russian offensive, but also a sudden shift in operational momentum across the Donbass. How can one carefully orchestrated strike change the course of an entire front? Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any other videos. September 9, 2025, at precisely 7:23 p.m., a Su-24M bomber, an aircraft more than 4 decades old, stood on the runway, undergoing its final checks for one of the most dangerous missions of the war. Ground crews worked with hydraulic jacks, locking 2 massive Storm Shadow cruise missiles under its wings. Each missile weighed 1,300 kilograms and carried a tandem charge warhead of 450 kilograms, engineered to penetrate reinforced concrete shelters and collapse hardened command centers from within. The combined 2,600-kilogram payload turned the aging bomber into a flying hammer. As the final lock test flashed green, the crew stepped back in silence. The target lay some 850 kilometers from the 7th Tactical Aviation Brigade's base in Khmelnytskyi Oblast. For the pilot, it was a one-way dive into danger. On paper, the Storm Shadow's 250-kilometer range looked like a guarantee of safety. In practice, it was a trap. To achieve precision against fortified headquarters, the launch had to occur not from 200 kilometers away, but from a suicidal 15 kilometers. That meant diving deep into Russian radar coverage, weaving through some of the densest air defenses in Europe. Still, the Su-24 rolled forward and lifted from the runway like an arrow loosed into the night. Flight time, 35 minutes. Margin of error, 0. A single mistake would hand Ukraine a catastrophic defeat, for at that very hour the Russian 41st Army and 20th Corps were preparing a counteroffensive in Podhordny. Ukrainian pressure along the Pakhovsk-Dolila line had forced 2 Russian regiments into a vulnerable pocket, and Moscow had dispatched heavy reinforcements to break the trap. Dozens of T-90 tanks, BMP-3 infantry fighting vehicles, and self-propelled howitzers massed in the rear, with convoys of fuel and ammunition queued for movement. The assault line was moments from rolling forward, but Russia's command had committed a fatal error. The day before, Ukraine's Hortitsia M electronic warfare system intercepted abnormal surges of data traffic across frequencies reserved for senior officers. Russian staff, secure and routine, had revealed themselves. Signals intersected at 2 nodes, the Topaz Radio Electronic Factory in northern Donetsk and the city's sprawling metallurgical plant. Shark reconnaissance drones, orbiting at 15,000 feet, confirmed the traffic with optical zoom lenses. They recorded motorcades, escorts, and high-ranking personnel entering and exiting. The 2 industrial complexes were in fact the command centers of the 41st Army and 20th Division. Ukraine had identified the brain of the offensive. Directly striking the armored columns was impossible. There was no time for ambushes or layered defense. The only path was bolder: decapitate the command hubs before a single tank turned its tracks. Success would hinge entirely on the Su-24. Donetsk skies were ringed by S-300 and S-400 batteries. Storm Shadows cruised at Mach 0.8 to 0.95, fast enough to evade some systems, but still subsonic, stable, and predictable. Launching from maximum range would give Russian radars nearly 15 minutes to detect and destroy them. The only solution was madness turned into method: reduce airborne exposure to under a minute. That meant launching at 15 kilometers, then surviving the inferno of Russian response alone without escort. The Su-24's edge lay in NATO-upgraded ECM pods, its low-altitude terrain-following radar, and the synchronized diversion of dozens of drones. Seconds after takeoff, the pilot shoved the stick forward, skimming just 50 meters above the treetops. Power lines flashed past the canopy, close enough to touch. Terrain-following radar kept the jet masked, a ghost sliding under Russian radar arcs. Yet invisibility depended not on the jet alone, but on a vast electronic ballet choreographed from Kyiv. Drones lifted from secret bases like pieces of an orchestra. 3 Peklo jet-powered cruise missiles led the opening movement. They were not decoys but vanguard attackers, programmed to strike the same 2 command centers as the Storm Shadows. Their job was to sow panic, drive officers into bunkers, and draw every Russian sensor onto themselves. Alongside them, 15 UJ-26 Beaver and Ram-2X kamikaze drones climbed to medium altitude. Their task: flood Panzer and Tor radar screens with false targets, force operators into misjudgments, and occupy precious launchers. 7 of the Beavers had a special mission to hit power distribution cabinets and UPS rooms of radar stations, creating momentary blind spots. In Kyiv's underground command bunker, encrypted satellite feeds projected icons of aircraft and drones advancing across a map lit with concentric red circles of Russian radar. Operators guided the formations, altering altitude and direction to generate confusing echoes. Russian screens erupted in noise, unusual profiles, sudden climbs, decoys diving at odd angles. Console operators scrambled, retuning frequencies, losing seconds that felt like hours. 2 kamikaze drones broke through. One struck a radar station, another a command vehicle. A gap appeared, a blind corridor just over a minute long. The Su-24 dove into it at full throttle, but survival remained uncertain. A Buriev A-50 AWACS, orbiting high overhead, caught the Su-24's heat plume. Data flowed instantly to an S-400 battery. In the cockpit, the pilot's headphones screamed with the lock warning tone. Reflex overrode fear. Stick yanked back, the bomber clawed upward. Speed bled away, and chaff flares spewed into the night. A Russian 48 N-6E missile roared toward the false cloud and detonated in a fireball kilometers away. The Su-24 plunged back down to the treetops, alive. Meanwhile, the Peklo missiles entered Donetsk from separate axes. 2 were destroyed by Tor and Panzer fire, but the third slipped through, slamming into the Topaz factory's communications tower. The explosion shattered the mast, severing the 41st Army's external links. Panic spread as alarms blared, and staff scrambled in confusion. It was the perfect moment. Shark drones circling above confirmed the presence of senior commanders inside. The final order crackled across the link from Kyiv: fire. The Su-24 released its burden. 2 storm shadows detached from the wings, engines igniting as they began their autonomous dive toward the heart of Donetsk. The pilot banked hard, fleeing the zone at treetop height, leaving behind a sky filled with chaos, flares, and incoming fire. 35 seconds later, the first missile pierced the ventilation shaft of the Topaz factory bunker, guided by the laser of a Shark drone. It detonated deep underground, the shockwave ricocheting through concrete corridors, obliterating staff, plans, and equipment. 8 seconds after, the second missile struck the metallurgical plant. Its tandem charge burrowed through reinforced slabs, opening a path for the main warhead. The 450-kilogram explosive erupted at the center of the command floor. The steel skeleton resisted for a heartbeat before collapsing in a cascade of fire and dust. The immediate Russian response was secrecy and containment. Both strike zones, the Topaz radio-electronic factory and the Donetsk metallurgical plant, were sealed within minutes. Spetsnaz detachments and FSB security cordons cut off all access roads. Floodlights illuminated the ruins as heavy machinery clawed at the rubble through the night. Ambulances and fire engines wailed without pause, their sirens echoing across the city, while convoys of military trucks diverted traffic. Official channels remained silent, but the reality could not be hidden. The twin command centers of the 41st Army and the 20th Division had ceased to exist. These headquarters were not symbolic offices. They were the nerve centers of Russia's Donbass campaign, nodes where battlefield intelligence flowed, orders were issued, and the tempo of artillery, aviation, and logistics was orchestrated. With them gone, the Russian command structure suffered instant paralysis. Encrypted networks collapsed into silence. Field units, cut off from their superiors, reverted to primitive paper messengers and unsecured radio calls. Coordination that once operated in minutes now dragged into days. The efficiency of Russia's mechanized formations, dependent on tight synchronization between sensors, artillery, and logistics, disintegrated overnight. Artillery fire, previously concentrated and devastating, faltered almost at once. The rapid sensor-to-shooter chain, in which UAVs and forward observers relayed data for precision barrages, was broken. Ukrainian monitors noted how Russian barrages shifted from disciplined salvos to sporadic harassment fire. Guns thundered blindly, shells fell wide, and frontline troops complained of silence where once there had been saturation bombardments. Thousands of Russian tubes, field howitzers, multiple rocket launchers, mortars were left deaf, awaiting orders that never came. Behind the front, the mechanized spearhead that had been forming remained inert. The vast convoys of T-90s, BMP-3s, and support vehicles sat idle in depots and staging areas. With command nodes gone, no orders arrived to release fuel or ammunition. Tank crews waited in their machines, engines cold, while supply convoys remained parked, drivers asleep in cabs. The armored assault died before its first track rolled forward. The shock reverberated far beyond Donetsk. The destruction of 2 hardened headquarters inside industrial complexes once considered untouchable proved that nowhere was safe. Officers who had believed themselves secure dozens of kilometers from the front now realized they were within reach of Ukrainian precision strike networks. Fear spread through command echelons. Survivors of the headquarters staff no longer trusted static positions. Russian command elements fragmented into smaller mobile groups, shifting locations constantly to avoid detection. While this reduced their vulnerability, it crippled their efficiency. Meetings grew shorter, orders fewer, decisions delayed. Coordination decayed into hesitation. Paranoia seeped through the ranks. Within hours, the FSB launched investigations, convinced that betrayal or infiltration had revealed the coordinates. Counterintelligence units scoured headquarters staff, hunting for leaks, sowing mistrust. Officers whispered of traitors in their midst. Morale suffered as commanders became wary of their own aides. Initiative withered beneath suspicion. For Ukraine, the strike was more than a tactical success. It was an operational transformation. A Russian offensive had been stopped before it began. The initiative shifted across the Donbass. Where once Ukrainian units had braced against Russian thrusts, now they dictated the rhythm. With artillery coordination broken and air defense coverage fragmented, Ukrainian drones roamed more freely. Bayraktars, Beavers, and Ram-2X loitered at will, striking convoys and artillery positions that had lost central direction. Ukrainian gunners, no longer suppressed by counter-battery fire, pushed forward, turning contested zones into kill boxes. Infiltration teams exploited gaps in the Russian line. Special forces and mobile assault groups cut supply routes, raided depots, and struck isolated posts. Defensive belts that had required months to breach now cracked within days. Ukrainian advances, once measured in meters, accelerated into kilometers. The impact was systemic. The Russian army's strength rested not merely in numbers of tanks and guns, but in the orchestration of those assets through centralized command. By destroying the 41st Army and 20th Division headquarters, Ukraine had severed the synapses that linked its enemy's strength into coordinated power. The result was paralysis at the operational level. The front devolved into disconnected fragments, battalions and regiments fighting blind, unable to support one another, unable to mass fires, unable to maneuver in concert. Strategically, the strike redefined the contest. It demonstrated how precision, intelligence fusion, and electronic warfare could outweigh brute force. A single bomber, armed with 2 cruise missiles and shielded by a constellation of drones and decoys, had achieved what weeks of attritional battle might never have delivered. At a fraction of the cost of Russia's mechanized offensive, Ukraine had erased its command brain and seized the initiative. Even the psychological effect was decisive. The myth of invulnerability surrounding Russia's command infrastructure collapsed. No officer behind the front could feel secure. This erosion of confidence, compounded by the FSB's witch hunts, gnawed at Russia's ability to coordinate future operations. Where once Moscow had struck boldly, it now hesitated. In Donetsk, the ruins of the Topaz factory and the metallurgical plant smoldered for days. Official statements downplayed the damage, but the cordons, the machinery digging through debris, the endless ambulance sirens told the real story. Ukraine's message was unmistakable. No headquarters, no general, no rear area fortress was beyond reach. From that night forward, the static trench lines of Donbass were no longer the only battlefield. The war had entered a new phase, one of maneuver, precision, and technological dominance. Ukraine had shown that initiative was not a matter of size or numbers, but of intelligence, coordination, and will. This was not just the story of 2 buildings destroyed or commanders killed. It was the story of how a single operation could change the tempo of an entire front. It marked the moment when Ukraine ceased reacting and began dictating. In the silence left by Russia's broken command, Ukraine found its opportunity. And in the ruins of Donetsk's industrial heart, the shape of the war shifted irreversibly.